data modeling solutions for challenging data model problems. I'm going to start at a 100 level, and then we're going to cover some 200 and 300 level material. But this is kind of an intermediate level topic. And I think it's important because we all need to be reminded that really the center of the universe in BI is the data model. And so I led off by this statement here. Do you suffer from ambiguous relationships? And only someone who has tried to create a model that didn't work would understand this. That if you model a whole bunch of tables together and you end up with these circular paths, the Power BI data modeling engine is going to complain and is going to say, you can't do that. That's an ambiguous relationship. All right, let's start out with Brian's favorite topic, and that is.
Are you sharing your screen, by the way?
Oh shoot, I tried to. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin, for calling that out. I was kind of wondering that too. I was like, is he? Yeah.
I thought my team was just being screwy.
You know, that's interesting because yes, I had chosen to share my screen, but now I see the red border, so apparently I missed something.
If you want to go back on any of the slides, do it.
I don't think I have to.
That looks nice.
Yeah.
Spiffy.
Anyway, so again, I would encourage you to go to my blog, look at this last post where I introduced these 13 topics. And like I said, freely post comments, feedback, questions, and those are the things that I'll be thinking about over the next few weeks as I actually complete blog posts on these topics. You know,
I think, Paul, if you want to minimize me in the bottom right. So.
I will never minimize you, Greg.
Okay, I'm shutting up now.
You know, I've always kind of struggled a little bit with coming up with really pertinent topics, and I thought, you know what? Let me brainstorm a list, put it out there, and then get people to give me some feedback and tell me whether I'm on the mark with these topics or not. Are these things that you think are important? And what thoughts and questions do you have related to these topics? So that's kind of the way I'm starting this. So please, please, please. All right. So the world is not flat. Now, there are a lot of people who don't understand that. In fact, there are a lot of people who use other BI tools like, let's say one that has a French name that means, table, which suggests that everything should be flat. And I'm not saying
flat, Paul.
There are a lot of people out there who believe that the world is flat. So let's look at a really simple example of a set of sales data that exists in a flat form. Now, this is the way that the business community really at large thinks about data. You know, if we were to take a cross section of people who work with data, who analyze data and crunch numbers, you know, I'm not quite sure what the statistics would tell us exactly, but I would venture to say that 90% of that population kind of go to the spreadsheet, you know, as kind of the thing that they think about. Everything belongs.
Are you sharing your screen again, Paul? Because it went away.
Apparently, PowerPoint in Teams are not getting along right now.
No, Teams is being an absolute POS today.
Yeah. So that's what's going on.
Did it give us 49 squares and now this?
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure where to go with this.
You want to try sharing your screen again? Maybe like pop in and out. There it is. Okay, cool.
And then I have to minimize you again.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I did notice that the red border goes away in Teams. So let's see how this goes. If I have problems, what I might do is put this up on one of my other screens and try sharing that. But so as we look at this flattened view of this sales data, you can see that we have a few different dimensions to this data. We've 3 different dates. So when you think about a sales order, you know, you have the date that the order was actually placed, the order date. You have the date that it might be due, and then we have the date that it was actually delivered. Now, this is a very common sample set of data, and we've seen different forms of this in the AdventureWorks database and other, sample databases that are very common and very popular, but everybody understands retail. And so this is kind of why this becomes our go-to. What else do we have? Well, we have customer information. So we've got the customer name, the company name, the customer key. And if this were a fully fleshed out data set, we could have geographic information, we could have, contact information, et cetera. We also have some product related information, the category, subcategory, and product name. And then we have some numbers. And if we were to talk to an Excel jockey, someone who primarily spends their time working with spreadsheets, they might call these measures. I would beg to differ because we have a slightly different definition, but these are numeric values that we typically aggregate. We typically do something mathematically with those numbers. So this is kind of the view of the world from the spreadsheet paradigm. But in our world, in the modeling world, the world is not flat. In fact, a paradigm that we commonly use, is the star schema. Now, the idea of the star schema has been around for a very long time. And I think that kind of in the BI journey, a lot of people kind of see that, oh, yeah, that's the star schema. That was that thing that we did. We had to create star schemas 20 years ago. When you design a data warehouse, you create fact tables and dimension tables. And that's kind of gone out of vogue. And now we've got tools like Power BI that don't require a star schema. The fact of the matter is that when you start getting into heavy duty modeling, typically the star schema, or at least the concepts of the star schema, are often the answer to our problems. So we can realize the star schema in a more materialized form here, where we have a sales table. This happens to be online sales. We could have store sales, online sales. We could have inventory. We could have actual transactions, and those things might belong in different tables, but we still might treat each of those tables as facts, meaning that they store those numeric columns that we're going to aggregate. But how do we describe facts? How do we filter them? How do we group them? How do we describe, what a sales is? Sales by customer, sales by region, sales by territory, et cetera, sales by date. Well, all of those things on the right side of the word by typically are going to be a dimension. And often, not always, but often, they might belong in another table. All right, so dimensional modeling is a general best practice. 20 years ago, we would say, this is it. It's the only thing that we do. We have to dimensionalize all of our data. It will improve performance. It will give you more accurate results if you dimensionalize your data, but it's not an absolute for simple attributes. What do we mean by that? Well, if I have an attribute back in that spreadsheet that might be just an order type or a simple category that, let's say, online order versus call-in order, you don't necessarily have to create a dimension table and store that in that other table. We have the freedom of kind of bending and even breaking these rules a little bit. So it's a guideline. It's not an absolute fact. There are rare exceptions, but generally speaking, it's good to dimensionalize. Well, who defined the rules of dimensional modeling? Where did this come from? Typically, we credit these folks with the dimensional modeling rules. It looks like a family. Now, that's not to be confused with these people. When I looked up this picture, it reminded me of this other picture, so I just thought that was kind of funny. But that's a Hollywood family on the right side. They were in a movie together. That's not a real family. The folks on the left, these people are not related. Actually, I believe that to the right of Mr. Kimball down on the right is his wife. But this group of people were the Kimball Group. And the Kimball Group retired about 6 years ago after, I think, 30 years in business. So they really kind of thrived around the rules of dimensional modeling that Ralph Kimball had, I don't want to say invented, I think he discovered. And much like Thomas Edison, when he was asked how great things were invented, he said that the great ideas are actually in the air. They're actually part of our reality. It just takes smart people with a problem to solve to be able to apply an invention as an answer to a problem. And I think that that's what Ralph Kimball did. And I think that that's a pattern that we see in our industry, that there are problems out there and the solution really is kind of like a law of physics that someone figures out. And in my mind, that's what the rules of dimensional modeling really are, is it was just something that was obvious once somebody figured it out. So what is the process of dimensional modeling? Well, first we need to understand a business process. So a business process might be an order is placed, all right? Well, what's the level of grain across all those dimensions that we discovered? The level of grain might be a date. You know, is it a time? Maybe we don't care about time, so we're going to say that it's a date. We don't care when in the day somebody called to place an order. We just need to know the date. Maybe we don't care about the date. Maybe it's the week or the month, but we need to understand that level of grain. Where is that person? Do we need the latitude and longitude of where their home or their office is, or is the city sufficient? Maybe the county or the state or the zip code are sufficient. What's that level of grain across that dimension? And then we have to identify all of the dimensions, all of the major dimensions, and then we identify the facts. And the fact is really based on our understanding of dimensions and grain. And we may have facts that exist at different levels of grain. So for example, a store sales fact may exist at the store level, and we need to know the exact address of that store. Yet we may not need to know exactly where the customer is. If they're an online customer, maybe for delivery we do, but we just need to know that I'm in Washington State and others are in Oregon State. And then there are a bunch of steps. I'm not going to walk through all these steps, but where do you go to learn about these steps? So what's interesting is when I'm presenting, I'm not able to follow these links, which I practiced all this up and I followed my links and it all worked just fine. So I'm going to go to the Kimball group. The reason that I'm going here is that, has my screen sharing stopped again, Greg?
Absolutely.
Just about 5 seconds ago. Yeah.
This is really weird. So
Are you sharing screen or sharing window? Because if you share window, it'll die every time.
Yeah, I know, but I'm sharing my screen. I'm sharing my laptop screen.
I'm telling you stuff you already know, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll just watch the red border and I'll go back and I'll reshare every time it decides to quit. This is really weird. I have not experienced this particular problem.
There we go.
And the reason I'm taking you to the Kimball Group page is that in my view, this really is still the go-to resource to figure out how to solve business problems with dimensional modeling exercises. And if you go to resources and to Kimball techniques, there's just a wealth of information that has not been duplicated. There are a lot of more recent authors and experts who have taken these principles and applied them to more modern concepts. But no one, in my view, has really surpassed what Kimball has done. So if you go to the Glossary of Dimensional Model Techniques, you'll see that there are over 80 dimensional modeling concepts. And if you go back and read the Data Warehouse Toolkit, this was kind of the original Bible from Ralph Kimball that's been updated a few times. All of that is in here. And even today, I find that as I'm working through complex problems, I'll go back to these techniques and it'll either prompt me to remember something that I had learned 15 years ago when studying dimensional modeling, or I'll just, I'll learn it from scratch. But it's just as true today as it's ever been. It's just that the tools and technologies have evolved a bit. I will point out that I talked about, more modern authors who have applied a lot of these concepts. This was a gentleman who we actually had speaking at a Portland Power BI user group meeting. What was it, Greg, Ron, maybe 3 years ago? that Lawrence Core came out and
Yep.
talked.
And he's actually doing a training pretty soon here virtually.
Fantastic. Yeah, Lawrence is fantastic, and he's got these great techniques for kind of stepping outside of technology and using Post-it notes and brainstorming sessions. He calls it model storming, and just really, really cool concepts. All right. So as we get into the tenets of dimensional modeling, one of the interesting things that you learn is one called role playing. So we talked about how there were 3 different date columns. Now we can define a date. Yeah, weird, huh?
I'll just keep. Should I give you a safe word?
Just keep resharing all over.
Data flex. Anytime it's not sharing, I'll say data flex.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to switch to another monitor, hoping that solves the problem. I apologize, folks, but this is a weird technical problem.
It's been an awesome narrative, Paul. Truly.
Great. That's because you're hearing everything twice. Okay, so I'm going to share screen 2. This is going to have a wide aspect ratio. I hope that's okay with everybody.
Ooh.
Whether it is or it isn't. Oh, now it switched me to presentation mode. I love PowerPoint, just kind of making up its mind about what it wants to do.
The PowerPoint live feature, though, at our Azure user group, Samuel Adriani tested it out. We went through it. Pretty freaking sweet. If anybody hasn't tested
Just
that out.
within Teams?
No, in PowerPoint, there's a PowerPoint live, and I'm not going to get into it. It's like it's a QR code. We can all scan it, and we can actually go through your slide deck like on our own, and we can even have transcription in PowerPoint. It's pretty sweet.
So I just shared this screen, and I see that screen sharing has quit again.
It died again.
This really kind of sucks.
This sucks.
Yes. All right. Well, we're going to go back to the laptop, and I'm just going to keep resharing.
Can you send it to Greg, and maybe Greg can share?
I can do that.
Yeah.
Paul, just turn your camera to it if that's possible.
Yeah,
sure.
maybe turn your camera off and turn the incoming video off.
No. Camera off. Do full screen again. Oops, I already switched monitors. And I'll share again. Okay. The concept of a role-playing dimension is that once we've materialized data into a table, we really don't need to go get that data again, but we do need, in order to create a role-playing dimension, I can see where it switches, and crap, I don't know what to do with this.
That is so, what a bummer.
Yeah, and now it's just dying.
Why? Do you want to try sending it to me, Paul?
Yeah, let me do this. I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'll email this deck to you. Actually, yeah, let me email it to you. I'm also going to drop out of the meeting and rejoin.
Sure.
Talk among
While
yourselves.
he does
folks.
that, I will do a dance. We can talk about data flex. Actually, with Alex on, I would love to hear from Alex. I mean, if everybody hasn't heard, Common Data Service has now been renamed to DataFlex and DataFlex Pro. The one awesome thing about DataFlex is it's another freebie when you're using when you're building for Teams and Power Apps, because the only other freebie you get is like SharePoint lists, and I can't remember some of the other freebies. But then DataFlex Pro is Common Data Service, correct?
Yes. You got it. Oh,
and if
confusion.
you'd like to join me in absolutely roasting the name on Twitter, please join me. Find my @ tag.
Yeah, is there a flux capacitor?
If you type in
Marco-
dataflex.com, there's like 200 companies with this name already. So I'll be kind of curious how they get past all the trademarks.
Oh. I loved Marco Russo's comment. He said, it seems like a mattress, a new mattress.
Well, they trademark it back to 1987 or something.
Okay, I got Paul's deck. All right, I am saving this. Let's get this guy back up and running. Let's see how fast I can do this. Get out of here. I do want to say Paul is one of the best historians I've ever heard present. If this is your first time hearing Paul present or not. But I think he does a great job just kind of walking you through the background of the background's background. All right, I'm not going to do that. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this doesn't screw up.
So Greg, that's on its way to you.
Oh, I got it. I am
did you?
about
Okay.
to share screen and we are back in business.
Good.
Boom, baby.
Let's do it that way, and then hopefully I'll at least be able to share my screen for demos.
Everybody can see?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, I
Okay.
do need to go to your do a slideshow, yeah?
Yeah, please.
Boom, 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 boom. Voila. Are we going to role play, Paul?
When is our wrap up time, Greg? Is it 7:30?
We can keep going. We're good.
Okay. Well, I think what I'd like to do is just accelerate some of these introductory slides. So
I'm on the right one.
Yes, you are. So the example that I'm showing on the left side, this is a sample set of data that I used to use all the time. I haven't used it for a while, but you imagine that an airline flight always involves two airports. The plane lifts off from an airport, it leaves from an airport, and it arrives at an airport. And that airport dimension table is the same. It's a list of airport codes and airport names and locations. There's no reason to import that data twice into our data model, but it may need to exist in the data model twice in order to play the role of the departure airport and the arrival airport. Likewise, in this slide builds, Greg, if you could just hit enter.
Yeah.
Likewise, you can see that if I add my date table to a data model, I can only have one active relationship at a time. And there you see one active relationship and one inactive relationship in the center. On the right side, you can see that I've actually materialized the date table 3 different times as the order date, due date, and delivery date. So the question is, does that actually duplicate the data in the data model? Yes, it does. Back in the days of multidimensional, so if any of you have worked with multidimensional analysis services building cubes, you know that there was actually a feature called role-playing dimensions, where when there were 3 keys on a fact table related to a single dimension table, that the designer would actually create those 3 different copies of the date table. It was doing exactly the same thing. It was duplicating, actually triplicating the data. Go ahead and hit enter and let this build. And then that brings us to the concept of bidirectional filters. And why don't we just skip over this slide, and I'll show this to you in a demo, since we need to kind of reclaim some time. Many-to-many relationships are an important concept in dimensional modeling, and it is often kind of a necessary evil. Power BI has a many-to-many relationship feature. And if you have a non-unique key in one table, let's say it's the account table that you see over on the left side, and you also have a non-unique key over on the customer table, and you were to drag and drop the, let's say the customer key from one table, this example is not working because I don't have a customer key in the account table, nor an account key in the customer table. But if I were to drag and drop a non-unique value from one table where I have a column that stores those same values in another table, Power BI would actually offer to create a many-to-many relationship. I don't ever do that. It's a feature that's handy, but internally it kind of creates a bridging table internally, but you don't have a lot of control. What we typically do, and the typical dimensional pattern, is that we create a bridge table. Here you can see the account customer, where we just have a unique set of accounts and a unique set of customers. Then we relate those two tables together. On one side of that bridging table, where you see the red highlight, in order for that many-to-many relationship to work, we have to have a bidirectional filter. The bidirectional filters have a performance cost, and it's something that you really have to accept when you're modeling many-to-many relationships. There are a few different patterns. I'm going to actually show you a purely DAX pattern for doing the same kind of thing. But to be able to build this into your model, typically we have a bridging table, and on one side there's going to be that bidirectional filter. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Greg.
Ooh, this has got a lot. This image you did is getting a lot of love and care.
Yep. So you have to be of a certain age to understand the never-ending story reference. I am going to try to take you to this graphic and share my screen. Let's see how that goes. Actually, you know what? I'm not, just out of the interest of time. But as we think about approaching data model design in a Power BI solution, one of the first and I think most important questions is, do we have a source of data that is clean and reliable? And as a consultant, if I go to a customer and say, okay, well, is your data clean and reliable? Greg, you know the answer to this. What are they going to say?
Wait, say that again.
So if you were to ask a customer, they're asking you to build a BI solution, and you say, well, is your data clean and reliable? Their answer is going to be what?
They're going to maybe think that it is, but no.
Right. They're going to say yes, and then we're going to put them on mute. We're all going to say liar.
We're all going to laugh. We're going to give snaps.
So data quality is a reality, and we have to start with a set of data that we believe to be reliable and substantial enough to model. And so we graduate to the next step, and we think about how we're going to source that data. Now, without reading the fine print, I'll say that if I have a relational data source, and let's say that it's SQL Server, but it could be Teradata or Oracle or any relational data source. If I write a hand-coded SQL, which a database developer is typically going to want to do because that's the tool that they understand, it limits Power BI's ability, and in particular Power Query's ability to do what it does best, and that is to translate the Power Query query steps into native SQL, which is what's called query folding. You can't do that when you handwrite SQL. And so we typically try to use either hit the tables directly if the tables are in the right structure, or we create views. You can also create a table-valued user-defined function or a table-valued function. So any of those database objects, Power Query typically will understand how to take transformation steps and translate that into T-SQL in this example. And then we're going to go through that dimensional modeling exercise, identify the facts, identify the keys, et cetera, then build our relationships. Now, the typical pattern here is that we're going to work through this entire process. We're going to model up tables. We're going to build some visuals. We're going to write some DAX. And then we're going to sit down with our business stakeholders, and they're going to say, oh, you missed something. We also need this feature. We also need you to calculate this thing. And in order to do that, you typically have to go back to the drawing board and enhance your data model. And hopefully you've built a strong enough foundation that will get you there. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Greg. Let's do this. I'm gonna move all the way up to my demonstration slide. So let's go ahead and stop right here.
Okay.
Couple of really important concepts. I'm going to open up Power BI Desktop and attempt to share my screen, and hopefully this will work out. So a dimensional model, uses relationships to support our business requirements. And that really should be kind of your core solution. It should be the core method that you think about solving a business problem or delivering, an answer to a business question. But once we've done that, once you've built that solid foundation, then we can use some fancier techniques to kind of build on top of that. And the first I'm going to show you is what we do with disconnected tables. Let me share my screen. Hopefully this will work.
I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. Yes, it's working.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it did work the first time when we tried this before. But far be it for me to be a naysayer. So the idea behind a disconnected table is that let's say that I want to be able to report on my sales quantity using a number of different time series perspectives. So if I've created a hierarchy here on my order date, let me just remind myself of what this hierarchy is. So this is just my standard calendar month, year, month name, and date. So I've assembled an ad hoc hierarchy, and across the members of that hierarchy, across year, across month, across all of the dates, I want to see the current quantity amount. But I would also like to be able to see my fiscal month to date. Now, fiscal month to date across a calendar year and month doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense across the dates, so I can do that. I'd like to be able to see month to date. I'd like to see prior year. I'd like to see the same period last year. And I'd also like to be able to see year to date. Now, since I'm looking at just the month of January, month to date, year to date should have the same numbers, and they do. All right, well, how do we do that with one measure? How do I make this utility measure that gives me the ability to do that? Well, the first thing that I really have to do is I'm either going to create a measure that's smart enough to figure out how I'm slicing it, how I'm grouping it, or I'm going to create a bunch of individual members or measures. So as you can see, I've done exactly that. So I have my online sales quantity. That's pretty simple. That's just the sum of sales quantity right there. And then I've got a month-to-date version of that. And I'm just using some really simple DAX here, using the built-in time series DAX functions, total MTD, doing the same thing with prior year and year to date. This is all pretty simple stuff. Now, I also have fiscal periods built into my date dimensions, so we could also do a fiscal month to date. So I have to write, some kind of more deliberate filtering logic into my DAX measure, but it's just simple filtering. I'm simply saying, okay, I want it to be in the same fiscal year as whatever I've selected, but the actual date needs to be less than or equal to the current date. So I have each of those individual measures. Now, then I create a table called selected measure, to remind myself what I called that table. So this table was actually created just by using the enter data feature. And so I literally went to the home tab and I clicked enter data, and I typed these values into rows, and that gets materialized as a table. In my data model, that's just a table hanging out here that's not related to anything. So that's that one right there. You can see I've done the same thing. I'm going to show you a few different flavors of different techniques that use disconnected tables to drive slicers. And then I create another measure that I've actually placed onto the values of this matrix called online sales quantity selected period. And that looks like this. So I'm using the switch statement. If you haven't used the switch statement in DAX, it's just a fancy way of stacking a whole bunch of if functions. So I'm just essentially saying, go figure out which period from my selected measure period table is currently in scope. Okay, which one do I have a filter context or a row context for that period? And if it's the value current, then go ahead and just return the value of this online sales quantity measure. If it's MTD, then return the month to date, etc. Now, there are two different ways in this scenario that that's going to happen. Since I've actually placed the period on columns, I'm gonna actually take my columns group off of this matrix, and I'm just going to select current. And there you can see that I'm getting my current value because I sliced on that. And so that table only has one row selected. There's only one value selected. And so that satisfies the criteria of the selected value DAX function. Now, if I group on this, which I'm going to go back and just apply that again. So we'll take selected measure period. We'll put that onto the columns group of this matrix. I'm effectively doing the same thing that this slicer is doing, just by grouping on that value on columns. And then I can further, I'm holding down the control key, and you can see that I'm only going to get the items that I'm slicing on. All right, so that's a disconnected table with a slicer combined with a switch statement. That's a very powerful technique that we can build on top of. So let me show you kind of a more complex version of the same principle. So I was teaching a class several years ago. I had someone who worked for an insurance company come up to me and say, hey, I work with insurance claims. In our business, it's really important for us to close claims. So when someone files a claim, that claim is open, and all the while that claim is open, that's costing us money. So what we want to do is we want to settle that claim as quickly as we can. So an important metric for us is how many claims are open. In other words, as of a certain date, the claim open date was before or equal to that date, and the close date is either empty or it's after the date in question. We can do the same thing with orders here. I'm just going to show you the solution. So let's say that we're Amazon, and it's really important for us to know how many orders are pending. So somebody has placed an order, but that order has not yet been delivered. So it's taking up space in our warehouses. It's out for delivery on a truck. That's costing us money because our customer has not received that order yet. So I can select a range of dates. So I'm just arbitrarily selecting a range here, and I'm saying between 5/6, 2008 and 10/7 of 2009. If you zoom in on that, you can see that there are 757 online orders that are pending delivery. The order's been placed on or before 5/16/2008, and the order has not yet been delivered. So the delivery date is either blank or it's on or after 10/7 of 2009. So how do we do this? Well, we do it by creating a disconnected table based on our date dimension. And I actually just created kind a table called select effective date. If you go look at that table in our model, you can see that just like before, collapse. I just have this table that's floating out in space. What I did is I referenced my date dimension query in Power Query. Then I only kept the date column because that's the only thing I really care about. That's all it is. It's just a copy of my date table with only the date, and it's not related to anything. Well, why in the world would I do that? So let's go back to our visual. And if we look at this column visual, you can see that I'm using a measure called online orders pending delivery. So in DAX, I'm just saying, all right, well, first of all, as the column visual renders each column represents a date. So in the context of that column, there is one single date in scope. So that has a context, and I'm going to go get that date. Now, the old technique was to use any aggregate function like min or max. We could also use selected value. That's probably a little more modern. I created this example quite a while ago. And then I'm going to say, all right, well, I know what my effective date is. In other words, I know what column I'm on. And then column by column, we're going to run this DAX code. And we're going to say, all right, go get a count of the rows in the online sales table. Get rid of any filter context that I currently have on that online sales table. I don't care what slicers or filters you've selected. Forget all that. And then go count all of the rows where the order date is less than or equal to this, the column that I'm on, that particular date, the selected effective date. And then the delivery date field in the online sales table is greater than the selected effective date. In this case, I haven't accounted for blanks. In other words, orders that have not yet been delivered at all. And so we could add delivery date is blank delivery date. But effectively that applies that logic through that same pattern of a disconnected table, a slicer, then a little bit of DAX magic to compare values. How are we doing on time, Greg? 7:19.
Got like 10 minutes.
At least 10 minutes. Any questions yet, since I'm not watching the chat?
I haven't seen any questions come up. We have been horsing around, that's for sure.
Go ahead and share the slide deck again, if you would.
Sure. You want me to switch
Okay.
slides?
Yeah, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
who
who
needs
needs-
relationships?
Yeah, who needs relationships anyway? So relationships really are the foundation of a strong dimensional model, and that's going to be the pattern that we typically use. However, once you've built that foundational model and that supports most of your business requirement, you can see that we're already kind of stepping out of relying on relationships and relying on tables being related to each other to be able to support more advanced business functionality, i.e. the way that I did the dynamic time series measure and this orders pending delivery. So this really gives you the freedom to kind of step back and think about solving your problem programmatically rather than just relying on stitching everything together and being constrained by the limits of relational design. There are limits to what we can do within a relational model. So I'm going to step off here and share my screen again. Let me point out an example of where relationships don't always support my business requirements. Let me zoom in using this option. So you can see that I have two fact tables in this model. I'm gonna move my store sales over here. Get that to stick. Come on, come on. I think that zooming in, sharing my screen, and moving things around in the designer was just asking way too much of my computer. All right, so two fact tables. We've got online sales and store sales. Online sales and store sales can both be related to store. This is an optional relationship. Online sales obviously don't have to be related to a store. But in the store sales scenario, trying to get that relationship line to not cross. There we go. In the online sales facts, I will always have a customer, and that customer will always have a geography. So I have a geography dimension here, and there's a geography key that exists in the customer table. Okay, so it's very easy to find out where my customers are. If I want to see online sales grouped by country or state or any other region, anything that exists in my geography table, that's easy to do because I have relationships that support that. Store sales are a little different. So we know that stores have a geography, but because geography is already related to customer, which is related to online sales, and online sales can be related to store, and stores have a geography, when I go to create this relationship, I'm going to get this statement that would create an ambiguous relationship. You can't do that because it's circular. The data modeling engine wouldn't be able to figure out whether it should go through store to geography, if I were grouping on geography, to report on online sales, or to go through customer to get to geography. So that relationship effectively doesn't exist. Now there are a couple of DAX DAX functions that can utilize an inactive relationship, but we're not going to do that. So how do I do that? How do I deal with that? Well, essentially what we can do is we can just work around our relationships altogether. Now we know that we know the geography key from the store, and that will match up to a geography key in the geography table. So let's go take a look at my measures again. And I'm going to say, let's see, store, online sales by sorry, I forgot how I did this. Let me go back to my by country. Where are you?
Where are you?
Where in the world did you go?
The world's flat, so it should be easy.
Geographic store sales.
There.
All right. So here I've used a measure called store sales. It was store sales. I'm sorry. I was looking for online sales. Store sales by quantity by geography. So let's go take a look at this. And so we've had to use a little bit of DAX magic to get there. And a couple different ways you can do this, but this is one of my favorite DAX functions, the treat as function. So what treat as does is it essentially says, all right, if we filter stores based on the geography key, that's just going to magically aggregate this store sales quantity. That's just going to work, all right? But if we go select a geography or group on a geography, filter a geography, that's not going to work because we don't have a relationship that supports it. But we can go get the values from essentially the filter context of our geography table, and specifically the geography key, we can take that set of values and apply that to the store geography key. So we're programmatically creating a relationship while this DAX runs. And that's what allows us to aggregate, in this case, against continents. And then you can see where I'm doing the same thing with states and provinces. Okay, so Greg, if you'd be so kind as to share the slides again. Treat as is just absolute magic, and you can do a lot of very creative things with it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And oh gosh, you know what? I'm gonna jump ahead because if you'd go to the next slide, I have the slide that introduces this next demo. Do I not? I should have a slide that. Oh, we jumped over the who needs relationships anyway. I'm going to go back and share this. Sorry, I did this out of order. So, answering the question, who needs relationships anyway?
We're alone during COVID. We need relationships.
Well said. All right. So here I have a this beautiful functional report. Here you can see that we're looking at online sales quantity by my product category. Here you can see it by subcategory, here by date, here across my date dimension hierarchy. Here it is by sales region. So all of this is just working as we would expect it to. If I change a slicer, then that's going to refilter my data. If I click on a date, that's going to cross-filter. Everything is working as we would expect it to, right? So there must be relationships to support all of this inherent filtering and cross-highlighting that's going on. But wait, there isn't. In fact, I only have one relationship in this entire model. How is this possible? How is it possible that I'm getting all of this functionality when I've just thrown a whole bunch of tables into my data model and I haven't modeled up any relationships at all? And the answer is that I cheated. Actually, the answer is that I just wrote a little bit of DEX. Now, I did make a point to leave this relationship between customer and geography because I need that, so I didn't have to write quite as much DAX. But if we go back and look at every one of these visuals, you can see that I'm using the same measure for demonstration purposes. And so that's my online sales quantity in this copy of my data model. And my online sales quantity measure looks like that. Okay. So I'm making up relationships programmatically in DAX where they don't otherwise exist. And so it's really a simple thing. I'm just saying, all right, select anything from the customer table, any attribute of customer, and then take that collection of customer keys, this table full of keys that is created by the values function, and apply that to the customer key of the online sales table. Likewise, do the same thing with date against the order date key, and do the same thing with product against the product key within online sales. So that answers the question, who needs relationships anyway? So let me go ahead and kind of change topics, and I'm not going to jump back to the slide that would have introduced this, but earlier in Reza's presentation, right at the beginning, we were talking about the external tools. And this is a feature in preview that was just introduced in the July release of Power BI Desktop. I'm going to ask for a little bit of interaction here and ask you to chat. Who has used the new external tools feature?
Some hands up. Got
Hands
one.
up, right? And I'm going to.
Raise your hands, peeps. 2, 3. I
Okay.
love that little badge actually works. 4.
So if you've used external tools, then I think we can assume that you've used one of those external tools at least. And you may be familiar with tools such as the ALM Toolkit, DAX Studio, and Tabular Editor. I would say that in order of importance, depending on what you're doing, you could probably skip over the AM Toolkit for now. These are just presented in alphabetical order. But in my last blog post over this weekend, I blogged a little bit about not only what the external tools feature is all about and how it works, and really it's just a ribbon that exposes these tools, but when you use any of these community supported tools, it also connects you up to this model, which is actually saves you a whole bunch of steps. These are not developed by Microsoft. The ALM Toolkit is actually the evolution of a tool that Christian Wade, who now works for Microsoft, created before he worked for Microsoft, but he continues to support it. That was the BISM normalizer. DAX Studio is an open source project created by Darren Gosbell in Australia. Tabular Editor is an open source project that was created by Daniel Oedeker, who lives in Denmark. And there's an important realization here, and that is that the Power BI product team are so focused on making sure that the Power BI platform and Power BI desktop are rock solid. They get updated on a regular cadence. They're focused on that. And they've exposed APIs, they've exposed object models, they've supported the developer community so that people can create their own third-party tools. And then rather than duplicating what the community has already created, they're embracing that and promoting it. Now, I just saw a recent comment to this blog post, and somebody said, I think it's a cop-out that Microsoft won't add this functionality to Power BI Desktop. And I get that reaction, but instead of spending all of their development cycles enhancing Power BI Desktop to add some enterprise feature, they're continuing to make Power BI Desktop better for the self-service story. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. But really, this is a statement that says we're community driven. All right, but how do these tools work? Now, the no relationships model is not the best example for me to use for these tools. So let me jump over and open up that PBIX that I had closed just a little while ago. So I would say that if you are a serious data modeler and you are thinking about creating shared data sets, larger data sets that maybe use incremental refresh or partitioning, if you need to add more data than might exceed the limits of a Power BI Pro license, that you should absolutely be using Tabular Editor. It is a more serious enterprise scale tool that is akin to using the Visual Studio add-ins for analysis services. And I posted to my blog just a couple of weeks ago just some thoughts around why I choose not to use Visual Studio for tabular editing anymore. Tabular Editor is a much richer experience. So we've got we've got our Power BI file open. Let me maximize this. And let's say that I want to go add a measure. And rather than using Power BI Desktop, I'm going to open up Tabular Editor. Now, not only does it open up this tool if I have it installed. Oops, looks like I've got two instances of it open just because I'm not quite sure what effect that would have. I'm going to close both and reopen it. All right, so not only does it open Tabular Editor, but I don't have to go connect Tabular Editor to my Power BI model. It did that for me. And you may know that when Power BI Desktop runs, it actually runs a little mini version of SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular on your desktop. And we're connected to that. That's my little sandbox instance. It uses a random port number to connect. And I can go down to a table. And let's go down to store sales. Let's go down to online sales. Oh. I put all of my measures in a hidden table. And this is something that I discovered recently. I have to go show hidden objects in order to see that that table. Oh, where did you go? I also think that I have to refresh.
Oh, you think you can get this in 5 minutes?
Okay. So there's my measures table. There's probably an easier way to refresh my metadata, but closing and reopening the tool did it. All right, so I'm going to just jump down. You can see the DAX right here, and I have this rich DAX editor that I could use to add measures, to copy measures, to modify measures. I have DAX formatter that is actually built into the tool. This is an awesome experience. There are a lot of things that I can do in this environment that I can't do in desktop. For example, I can add partitions to a table that I can't do that in desktop, and then I can only process the partitions that I would need to actually process. All right, I'm going to show you one other tool. DAX Studio, also an awesome tool. It's hard to give a real quick tour of DAX Studio, but a lot of rich capabilities there. Version control, being able to manage models authored by multiple developers. Let's say that I have one copy of a PBIX that I've added some things to, and then somebody makes a copy of that and they go remove some things and add some things and change some measures. I have no idea where I am now with these two different copies of my PBIX files. I'm going to open up the ALM toolkit. That's going to connect by default to the model that I have open. I'm going to compare that to another model that I have open. And this is going to do a schema compare between both of those models.
That's pretty sweet.
Yep. And you can see, let's go ahead and do a compare. Oh, let's start with this one. All right. And here you can see that there I have a difference. Here I have measures that exist in this model that don't exist in this model. And you can go down and choose your actions, and you can filter those actions to make this really simple. But essentially I can say, oh, well, this other developer went and added a bunch of measures, and I don't know where they are and what they are. But by comparing the two, I could just say, well, let's just go select the option to create those measures. We validate the selection, hit the update button, and it'll run the script against this other model and add them all to my master copy. So this is just an awesome tool. Like I said, this is kind of the evolution of an earlier tool that Christian had created as an add-in for Visual Studio called the BISM normalizer. That is terminology that would make sense to someone who did tabular modeling in Visual Studio prior to Power BI. But he worked with Mac software to build the interface, but the code is still the same. So with that, Greg, if you would go ahead and share the slide deck, we'll go ahead and conclude, and then I can wrap up.
Sure. Tell me where to go to. This external tools.
Yeah, so again, that's just a blog post that I had written about this, and the gist of that blog was not only that the tool exists and how to use it, but really the statement that the Power BI platform is half Microsoft and half community, and you really need to be aware that it's the community that supports these products, and that's a different experience than companies might have with other vendors, where you buy everything from that vendor, and you always pay to to get updates, and Microsoft thinks differently about these things. So go ahead and move it to the next slide. We're not going to get into to this topic deeply, but I just wanted to point out, and go ahead and stop on this slide. Go ahead and let that second slide build, Greg. And stop right and back up one. I'm sorry. So if you go to follow this link, you would discover that Microsoft are working on something. This has been kind of top secret for the last 2 or 3 years. And when they announced the Wave 2 roadmap earlier this year, I believe, they let the cat out of the bag and essentially said the definition of composite models that we have today, which essentially means that I can go add an import table to a data model, and then I can go add another table and choose direct query, and those can both coexist in the same model. And that's kind of cool, that if I've got a really big fact table and I don't want to load all that data, that I can use direct query and probably suffer the performance penalty that comes with using direct query, but I can build aggregations over the top of that. So that's cool that you can do that, but in the near future, probably in preview in November and then general availability sometime next year, you're going to have the ability to take multiple shared data sets that reference each other. So rather than copying tables, and or using direct query, you'll be able to say, all right, I want to go point to these 3 tables that are in shared data set A, and I want to go point to these 5 tables that are in data set B, and I'm going to have this master data set that actually doesn't have any data in it. It is just a metadata shell that lets me share multiple Power BI data sets. Now, that is an extremely powerful notion that will both make it possible to solve business problems in very creative ways and probably get some people in a lot of trouble who don't understand how to tame and use it correctly. But that's coming, and it's really going to be a game changer for true enterprise scale data modeling. But I'll add to that the core tenets of dimensional modeling and the techniques that I've shown you don't change at all. You've got to build on the basics. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Greg.
Yes, sir.
All right, and with that, these are some resources that you can follow. There is an earlier version of this deck on my blog now. If you go to my blog to presentations, you'll find that earlier version of the deck. I'll go ahead and update the deck tonight, and so you'll have all of the recent material that I've added more recently. And with that, that's it. My last slide is Q&A. And let's see if there are any questions that we can answer before we wrap up officially.
Paul, some snaps. Paul, thank you. I know we had some, technical difficulties, but hey, we worked through it, right?
Well, thank you. Thank you for being the PowerPoint chauffeur, Greg. I'm going to remind you one more time. This was my ask earlier. If you would be so kind as to go take a look at this blog post, look over this list of topics, and if you have thoughts about additional topics or anything you want to make sure that I cover in these future blog posts, please comment, and I'll be sure to do that.
Cool. Any questions? If anybody wants to jump off mute.
Yeah, first question. Hey, Paul, great presentation. This is Mark. So question.
I recognize your voice, Mark. Hello.
Okay. Can you kind of compare and contrast data flows versus the new composite model? Will data flows kind of go away?
No, I think that these are 2 different technologies that, though they're related, they do serve different purposes. Data flows will continue to be the thing that Microsoft wants you to use because it's in the cloud. We can build composite models on top of entities that are described in a data flow. And I think that will continue to be a big part of the enterprise story. So I think that we're building toward a more holistic solution, but data flows are the Power Query, the ETL part of Power BI, whereas whether they're just single source models or composite models, mixed mode models, and even this new thing that's kind of composite models, we're still trying to come up with the right term because we've already used composite models. But these super composite models, the tables in those models could be entities from data flows and regular Power Query. So I don't think that changes.
Okay, and another advantage of this composite model is that now I potentially have access to all those measures that I've kind of created that serve kind of a general service function.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Exactly. So that's all shareable now. And I think that there is going to be a greater need to manage that, to some kind of a shared vision, because I think the danger is that it can evolve to become out of control. But properly managed, we can create a master model that has our measures in there. And then we can hang other tables that belong to other models off of that. And then we can add measures on top of that composite model.
Okay, and then maybe just one other quick one. So any advice on kind of, as you're developing measures from a development standpoint, which is built on a production model, how to keep that clean?
Yeah, that's a business discipline or an operational discipline. It's not something that is going to be solved through our development tools. There's been a lot of thought leadership about the right way to do continuous integration in Power BI. And anybody who talks, on that topic, and there are a number of thought leaderships or thought leaders in the industry. Melissa Coates is probably one of the people who I think has done the most remarkable job at Data Check, I believe. I always get SQL Check and Data Check.
And she will be presenting in September. Yes.
Yeah. Reza has, Chris Webb has, I've tried to define, my version of best practices. The Italians, I think, have done a really good job with that as well. So I think we as a community continue to try to iteratively describe and then re-describe best practices as we weed out what works and what doesn't work for us. Microsoft have created these marvelous technologies, but what they don't do for us is tell us how to, they'll often tell us how to use them, but they won't tell us how not to use them. And that means that there's just a lot of randomness and chaos that kind of comes out of that equation. So, again, I think that there are a handful of people who I trust with that message, but it's always evolving.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, you bet. Oscar Asgard did a really good presentation at last year's Oregon SQL Saturday on this topic as well, around continuous integration. You can go to the SQL Saturday site and get his slide deck. That's Oscar with an A. He's from Iceland.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining. I know we went a little late today, but I told you so. It's been a great evening. I mean, so much was said, so much was done. A lot of emotions shared, and hey, we got to kick off, 5 strong years of this platform. And so thank you for being such an integral part of the community. Thank you, everybody that just continually comes every month and just adds color, adds conversation, adds great questions. So wishing everybody adieu. Have a great evening. Hopefully see you around next week for a Power Platform user group or all these other different links and events, everything that's coming up. Stay safe and stay healthy. And with that, good night.
Take care, everyone.
All right, thanks everyone.